We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went.
I recently saw a question in my Facebook group asking whether the FBI ever had any real suspects in the D.B. Cooper case, being people they genuinely investigated, not just random tips or names that floated in. Indeed, the Bureau opened files on roughly 1,000 men, but after reviewing those documents myself, it's pretty clear that about 98% of those guys were dismissed almost immediately. However, a few names do pop up in the files that I'd feel comfortable saying were legitimate suspects, given the effort that the FBI put into them. They may not have investigated these men for long before eliminating them, but you can usually get the sense reading through the files which suspects the agents seem to take more seriously than others, and I'll go through a few of those guys in this video here. Also, I'm not planning on going into too much detail here, since I've already made videos on a few of these guys, and I am certainly planning on doing videos on the majority of the rest. Finally, I don't personally believe that any of these guys were Cooper, so this isn't me suggesting that they are. This is just a comment on which men the FBI seem to take an interest in. I'll take them in the order that they came to the FBI's attention. Donald Burnworth was an airline pilot for United who was furloughed at the time of the hijacking. He was also going through a messy divorce and had gone to Germany with his kids to get away from his wife, who was apparently the daughter of a mob boss. Just looking at the guy compared to the sketch, you can certainly see why he became a suspect. In fact, recognizing his own resemblance to the sketch, Burnworth suggested to the FBI that his wife had hired a look-alike to pull off the hijacking in order to frame him. Anyways, his photo was eventually shown to eyewitnesses, and they all agreed that he was not their hijacker, and he was thusly eliminated. Sheridan Peterson was one of the earliest suspects in the investigation. Peterson is well known to everyone who follows the Cooper case. He was a former smoke jumper and former Boeing employee with one hell of an independent streak. In the 1960s, he even once performed a skydive stunt on behalf of Boeing while wearing a business suit. The FBI were all over him for a while before eventually concluding that he was almost certainly in Nepal at the time, living in a hut and writing his pseudo-memoir of the Vietnam War titled The Idiot's Frightful Laughter. The FBI did come around again in the early 2000s to collect his DNA for testing, but the results of those tests were inconclusive. Ralph Silkwood was a DJ out of Los Angeles who went by the stage name Jim Woods. He was suspected of faking his own death 2 days before the hijacking. On that day, he told his wife that he was going out to the harbor to work on his boat, but his boat was found the next day floating in the ocean without him in it. Earlier in his career, he had worked as a DJ in the Portland area, and there was some belief that he was back up near Portland the week of the hijacking. Silkwood had also taken flying lessons at some point just before his disappearance. He eventually turns up alive after being arrested on an unrelated matter in 1974. At that time, the FBI are able to get his prints and even get a piece of his hair, which they send to the crime lab to be compared against a hair that was found on the headcloth of Cooper's seat. It was no match. Silkwood was also a blonde and just didn't really match any of the physical descriptions of Cooper, but the FBI did devote some substantial energy into investigating him before eliminating him. Next we have Jason Langath. He was the most often investigated individual throughout the entire investigation, with the FBI spending effort on him in 4 different decades, as early as February 1972 and as late as 2003. Langath is notable among Cooper's suspects because I am quite certain he is the only one who was ever busted lying to the FBI concerning his whereabouts that day. Their investigation into him showed that he was a skydiver who had been practicing night jumps for the 6 months prior to the hijacking and had been bragging to friends about how he was going to commit the perfect crime. In the late 70s, the FBI approached him and offered to give him a polygraph examination, which he refuses, although I can't say I blame him for that. Eventually, in 2003, the FBI show up and ask him to submit some of his DNA, which he freely does. His DNA doesn't match any of the 3 partial profiles recovered from the tie, so they eliminate him. Although I don't trust any DNA testing the FBI ever did because the only DNA they have comes from this tie. In the early 2000s, the crime lab found 3 very partial DNA profiles on this tie. However, since the tie became a piece of evidence long before DNA was a thing, agents didn't handle it with the modern standards of evidentiary care that you would expect, and so it's unlikely that any of these 3 partial profiles belong to Cooper. Donald Sylvester Murphy is a guy that I already have an entire video on. Murphy and an associate were the only people ever convicted for anything involving the Cooper hijacking, and it was for impersonating Cooper. Murphy and his pal cooked up a scheme to defraud the media by selling a fraudulent interview with D.B. Cooper. For their scheme, they primitively photoshopped serial numbers from the Cooper ransom onto a few $20 bills. They used this as proof that they represented the real Cooper and proceeded to try and sell an interview. Newsweek editor Carl Fleming bit on the ruse and paid Murphy $25,000 for the interview. When Fleming realized he had been duped, Murphy was arrested for perpetrating this fraud and was subsequently convicted and sent to prison. Ironically, even though he was just pretending to be Cooper, he became an actual suspect because of his uncanny likeness to the hijacker. When his photo was shown to eyewitnesses, the majority of them believed that he could have been Cooper. They said he looked almost exactly like their memory of the hijacker. Stewardess Florence Schaffner said his image was the closest thing she had seen to the hijacker out of hundreds of suspect photos that she had been shown. Regardless of his resemblance, though, further investigation eliminated him as a suspect. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., you just had to know he was on this list. He was certainly considered a viable suspect by the FBI for a couple of weeks in April 1972, after he pulled off a very similar parachute hijacking. But if you read through the FBI's internal files, it's easy to see why they eliminated him. All of the eyewitnesses to Cooper saw numerous photos of him, and they all said he was not their hijacker, even pointing out specific differences in the two men. The FBI also uncovered a great deal of intel indicating that he had never left the Provo, Utah area during the hijacking. He was also seen the next morning after the hijacking in Provo hosting a Thanksgiving lunch for his family and several exchange students from BYU that he had invited over. The FBI eventually concluded that he was just another Cooper copycat and not the actual guy. Fred Catalano was the best suspect to emerge from the FBI's efforts to contact airlines for leads. Early in their investigation, agents contacted every airline and asked them for a list of recently terminated employees or current employees who were just bad eggs. The cream of the crop among these names that various airlines sent in was Fred Catalano, who was then working as a purser for TWA. The company referred to him as a rebel and a rule breaker. Seriously, how obnoxious do you have to be as an employee for your own company to turn you in as a suspected hijacker? Catalano was intriguing to the FBI because one eyewitness, Robert Gregory, seemed to take a particular liking to Catalano's photograph. Upon investigation, Catalano was seen to be off the week of the hijacking, and his alibi could not be established for November 24th. Further investigation into him in 1972 looks to have fallen through the cracks, and he doesn't show up again on the FBI's radar until the early 2000s when they go looking for him to collect his DNA. But there is no evidence that they ever received any DNA samples from him, and so no testing ever occurred. Thus, he may be the only legitimate suspect who was never officially eliminated. Jack Bryant Kofel probably has the most pages dedicated to him within the FBI's files. This guy was a felon and a con man who spent a great deal of his life just fabricating BS stories about himself, one of which was that he was D.B. Cooper. After Kofel drank himself to death in 1975, one of his former prison buddies was able to sell Kofel's story to a Hollywood studio. Despite having no aviation experience or parachuting history, the FBI did take him seriously as a suspect. What gained their interest was hearing that stewardess Florence Schaffner allegedly identified Kofel as Cooper after she was cornered at the Denver airport by a Hollywood producer who showed her Kofel's photos. Schaffner later denied to the FBI that she had identified him, merely stating that he had some similarities to the hijacker like his nose, thinning hair, complexion, and long face. Kofel wasn't Cooper, however, and many of the details he provided to his associates were demonstrably false, such as claiming that he had jumped near Mount Hood, and the FBI did eliminate him. Robert Ragstaw's experience with the FBI in the late 70s would certainly justify him being labeled as a legitimate suspect. I've got an entire video about him on my channel that goes into the many reasons why he was eliminated as a suspect, so I won't go into any more detail about him here, but he does belong on this list due to the effort that the FBI put into him. Orville Lions was a Marine Corps veteran of the Korean War and later served with a smoke jumping unit in Arizona in the early 1960s. He came to the FBI's attention in the early 1980s when a former girlfriend saw a TV show about Cooper and thought there was a strong resemblance to the sketch. She claimed that she was dating Lions in 1971 in Seattle, and that he disappeared shortly after the hijacking. Lions was a drifter, and the FBI had a tough time locating him, but they did eventually find him in 1984, working as a handyman at a hotel in Mississippi. According to the FBI, when they first approached him for the interview, he's the one who brought up the Cooper hijacking, not them. That certainly seemed to raise some alarm bells. Additionally, he had a limp and his right leg was atrophied. Upon being questioned about the origin of his injury, he claimed that he fell out of a tree in late 1971 while working at his home in Seattle. All of this really intrigued the FBI, and they were so interested in him that they even took a sample of his hair, which was tested against the Cooper hair, but there was no match. The files have yet to be released indicating why Lyons was eliminated, but I presume he was, since case agents didn't go looking for his DNA in the early 2000s. Dwayne Weber had a fair amount of effort put into him in 1995 after he allegedly confessed to being Cooper on his deathbed. Despite some news articles stating that there have been scores of deathbed confessors claiming to be Cooper, I actually only know of 2 within the FBI files, and that's Weber and another guy named Arthur Durham, who just doesn't even warrant any discussion at all. He's just terrible. Weber, a career criminal by trade but not by talent, had a widow who was pretty relentless in promoting him as Cooper, and there were certainly some things about Weber that did line up with Cooper from a physical standpoint, although those ears should have eliminated him immediately. Passenger Bill Mitchell, who sat across from Cooper, saw a photo of Weber and said that there was no way he would have failed to have noticed ears like that. Nevertheless, the FBI did take Weber seriously as a suspect, and his DNA was tested, and like everyone else's DNA who was tested, it was no match, so they eliminated him. Finally, we've got L.D. Cooper. He came to the FBI's attention in 2011 when his niece Marla remembered her uncle L.D. and another uncle named Dewey planning something sketchy back around Thanksgiving 1971. What really seemed to get the FBI interested in him was that upon viewing his photograph, stewardess Florence Schaffner said it was the closest likeness she had ever seen. You may be noticing a pattern here with Lovely Flo almost identifying Murphy, Kofel, and now L.D. Cooper. And just like everybody else, his DNA was collected and tested and failed to be a match, and he was thusly eliminated. So there you have it. Those are the suspects whom I would classify as actual suspects, given the FBI's level of investigation into them. And if you're interested in reading the FBI's files on most of those men I talked about in this video, you can go to my website, nordjack.org, and go to the Suspects tab. Anyways, that's all I've got for today, folks, so like and subscribe and all that YouTubey stuff, and I will talk to y'all again soon. Bye.